What's up, YouTube? So I finally just, well, yesterday I got done installing my water temperature gauge and my oil temperature gauge on my E36. It wasn't too hard. The hardest part was honestly getting the wires underneath or through the firewall. There's a couple of places, and if you want to do it the easy way, you replace the oil filter housing with one out of it's a M54 out of a E46 or a 5 series with the M54b28, B30, any of those. Let's see. Go out here and I'll show you where I put the sensors. So replacing the housing on the M54 engines, the oil filter housing is going to have a oil temperature sensor right there, and on the back you have the oil pressure. I have an aftermarket oil pressure gauge, so that's what that big blob there is. So you put the sensor right there in that factory port. For the coolant, there's, possibly see it down there, might be able to see it, yeah, right down there. That's where the coolant temp sensor is, and in its location you'll have this little kind of barbed fitting that goes to the throttle body heater, which I'm not running a throttle body heater on this car. So if you want to drill and tap it, almost all of them will have this spot right here. It's recommended to remove this plug, or if you have the M50 B25 TU or M50 M52, any of those, most of them will have this spot. I'm not sure about the non-Vanos, but the TU models will have this. So you'll remove this plug, which if you haven't done it before, I recommend going to like ECS Tuning or any of those places and ordering a kit to actually rebuild this. That way you no longer have any leaks, or you eliminate leaks in the future. But you'll drill and tap this, and you can put your sensor in there, and it ends up making it really pretty easy. Let's see, back over to here. If you have a M50B25 TU or an M50B25, you can use the M52 through M54 oil filter housing. It's just, if it's a non-Vanos, you'll have to plug the Vanos line in the back, which if you're running a turbocharger, you can actually use that as an extra oil feed line, or you can just put a plug in it. The other thing is the alternator is the same, but the power steering pump will be different. So you need to get parts off of a 328i to convert the power steering over. One big downfall is if you want to run an oil cooler, conversion cap for this, the M52 and M54 is a lot more expensive than the M50s. You don't have the option of the oil cooler lines down there on the side. It's easier, I can show you over on this one. You don't have the option for the oil cooler lines, which would be like, one would be over here and one would be over here, and this would be molded different. But one thing that I did is, because a lot of this stuff, when I did the engine swap, I got all this out of a 5 series. So the power steering was up here. On the 3 series, it's actually supposed to be way down there. And I found it to just be more convenient to have the power steering up here than have to remove all the intake and all that stuff just to put power steering fluid in it, or to be able to check it. So I did that. One thing, if you have a 318, like 95 and older 318, the diagnostic port is actually going to be on the left side. It's supposed to go right here, but all the other ones, the diagnostic port goes over on this side. So I've thought about cutting and extending those wires to go over there, but then they would also hit the intake boot. So I might end up cutting that off and painting it, and I might tack weld it over here. I haven't decided what I want to do there yet, but either way, I gotta move it. The other thing is I just ran 4 wires into the cab. That way I would have an OBD2 port. And also, here's your jumper box. On the OBD2 cars, you'll have a like secondary air pump right here, and the box will actually be kind of pushed up against here. So you can run, there's 1 extra wire for the OBD2 cars that's not on the OBD1, so you can actually hook them all onto the OBD1 jumper port, but you can't have the front cover. If you have a 3D printer, you could probably build something custom to clip over that. I haven't had a huge issue. The other thing is I prefer to have this quick disconnect here. If I ever do have to pull the valve cover, I can, and not have to take the coil packs off. I just unscrew it and come it off. If we're at the track or something like that, I can get in there and fix something really fast. Otherwise, what you can do is actually just cut both of these and hardwire it together. So there's that. The AC compressors, there's not a whole lot different between the OBD2 and the OBD1 cars. Now, if it's a 318, the compressor is a lot smaller, and all the lines are going to be shorter. So if you're not running air conditioning, you can just get you pull off this cowling here. There's an Allen head screw. You unscrew that, and the entire assembly comes out. Then you can just put a plug in there. Just plug that hole down there. So you'll do a complete AC delete. I also have a toggle switch wired in for the auxiliary fan. It's tapped into this radiator switch. Some of these wires the car was wrecked, and a lot of the harness was just mangled, so a lot of this I don't even know what it goes to. But I tapped into the high side, or the high speed, and it uses ground. So you'll take the ground from the sensor, and then with the switch you'll send it back into the switch. So it bypasses the switch with a toggle switch inside, and that turns the fan on to high if it ever runs hot. One thing that I've noticed is once it's up to operating temperature, and my cooling system's not that great, it's mostly all this factory. The factory gauge will show it's right in the middle, but just sitting in traffic, not moving, and then once driving around, it stays at about 210 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be 98.8 Celsius. Or if I'm going down the freeway on a cool day, it stays around 98 Celsius, which is 208 point something degrees Fahrenheit. So there's that. Also had to do some slight modifications to the eBay cold air intake. One thing I would like to find another piece of 3-inch aluminum pipe. That's like maybe a 45, because the factory one comes with this little piece down there for your thermostat for the throttle body heater, but because I'm not using that, it's just a little nub down there. But there's that. I have the intakes down there by the tire. I have a little bar coming up, and it's in place of the cruise control. The other thing is, when you do the swap from the 4-cylinder to the 6-cylinder, your cruise control, the module's the same, but the cable is different. It's going to be too short, so you can actually unhook the cable and put a different cable on it. You don't have to change the entire thing. The other thing is your throttle cable is actually longer. This is the one from the 318. I haven't changed it yet, but it's quite a bit longer. So got kind of got a loop in it, and it doesn't affect it a whole lot, but it does make the throttle pedal slightly stiffer to push down. A lot of the wiring right now, I haven't gone through and put it through the loom yet. I gotta pull the intake manifold to replace a couple things, but and then also the mass airflow sensor. I have some wires breaking there, so I'm waiting for another plug to come in. But that's pretty much it. This is a 95 318 that was wrecked in the front end. I put a m52b28 with a stroker kit in it, and I couldn't find a ZF transmission, so get rag 250G transmission. The other thing is in the rear end. Let's see if I can go back now. Gotta crawl underneath the car for that. The differential is a small case, which for most of a year I was driving with this setup, and the differential held it just fine. It was a limited slip with the 345 gear ratio. Whenever you go to a medium case out of a 323, 325, 328, any of those, some M3s, US spec M3s, they'll fit in the subframe, but the CV axles will actually be different. So you'll have to change the CV axles, and let's see, you also have to change the drive shaft because it is a different length. And also the drive shaft when you hold them side to side, they don't look that different. Lengthwise, they're pretty obvious, but the actual diameter of the pipe doesn't look too different. However, when you measure it with some micrometers or something like that, it is slightly bigger. So I would recommend changing that. Let's see. Overall, the car's holding up pretty good. One thing, you can kind of see it down there. Let's move this right here out of the way. So down there is the little plug with a hose clamp on it. That would go to the thermostat for the throttle body heater. You just put a plug on that. It's not going to affect anything. I do have the heater core hooked up, so I have heat during the winter. It's starting to get cold here. It's like 45 degrees out here, and it's 45 degrees Fahrenheit out here in Idaho. Well, it's starting to get kind of cool, but that's pretty much it. Not a whole lot to it. It's just a bunch of nuts and bolts and trying to get everything ready for race season again, and a bunch of trial and error. And once it's all set up, I'll go through and make some custom looms and get everything kind of fixed up and no wires hanging out. But right now I'm still going through chasing check engine lights and things like this. It's just air compressor hose just so I could pass emissions, because that had to be hooked up. I'll eventually go and get some probably AN line or something like that, and replace all that. But oh, the other thing, so the motor mounts between the 318 and the 325, 328 E36s, they are actually different. If you just look at photos online, they look to be the exact same. They are about a quarter to half an inch shorter on the 318, so the engine actually sits down lower, and then also the subframes are different, and you'll also have I cut them off, but you can kind of see a little bit of the shiny metal poking out there. That's where the power steering reservoir would actually sit on the 318, and then over here I need to finish grind that off and paint it. That's where your coil packs would sit. But overall, if you've done a few swaps on these, it's not that difficult. It was more challenging because I wanted the tunability with the OBD2 cars than the OBD1. I don't want to have to go out and buy like 30 or 40 different chips. So I converted the entire car over to OBD2. It was pretty easy, with this being a already OBD2 car. It had the crankshaft sensor in the back, so that was just all plug and play. And then I made the adapter harness over there that I need to finish putting that all up in a loom and make it look pretty. But other than that, it's all pretty simple. So if you like it, like and subscribe, and comment questions, or if you dislike it, just thumbs down. Whatever you want. Thanks. Bye.